Coming up on Carolina This Week, our 7th District Congressman Tom Rice joins me for the half hour. Carolina This Week starts right now.
This is Carolina This Week. Carolina This Week with Tim McGinnis.
Good morning and welcome to Carolina This Week. He is a little bit into his second term as congressman representing the 7th District of South Carolina. Congressman Tom Rice is my guest this morning. Congressman, thanks for taking time to stop by and talk to us. I hope to touch on a whole bunch of issues this morning. I want to start off, you today toured a VA center in Myrtle Beach. We're about a year away from when the VA was making headlines every night. Obviously, a lot of work to be done there, fixing the system. How broken is it still?
There is a lot of frustration out there, Tim. You know, right after the Phoenix story broke, we did a veterans tour through the district, and we went to 6 different VFW or DAV facilities and asked veterans to come and explain to us their frustrations. And you know, we had 50 to 70 to 100 veterans at each one, and there's a large amount of frustration. This morning we went to the clinic itself, and there were veterans in the waiting room, and I went through and shook their hands and asked them how I could help them. And you know, truthfully, I'd say a large majority of the veterans love the VA facilities. But there is a significant minority that is extremely frustrated with the bureaucratic red tape, with the time it gets to be treated, and with other aspects of that bureaucracy. We sat down with the head of the Charleston region, which Myrtle Beach is in the Charleston region, all the way down to Savannah, and some of the people who work in this local clinic, and the head primary care physician for the region, and we talked about problems and solutions.
I have talked to a lot of veterans here, some who have told me about big problems they've had going through the system, and like you mentioned, others who say, I don't see what everybody's talking about. There's not that big of a problem. What I think a lot of people may not realize, a lot of a congressman's job is answering constituent questions, trying to tackle their concerns or problems they might be having. What happens when a veteran who's having a tough time getting the care they need contacts your office?
Well, let me say this. I have 7 people that work in this district full-time for my office, and the biggest part of their job is casework, where a constituent has a problem with some aspect of the federal government, whether it be Social Security, Medicare, veterans, passports, you know, whatever. There's a litany of things that they deal with. Over 40% of the cases that we deal with are frustrated veterans, people who are trying to either get the medical care that they deserve or the benefits that they deserve. And to me, that is a really horrific statistic, that it takes 40% of the time of my congressional staff to deal with the VA. And then when you consider on top of that, that every county in the state has a veterans liaison office. It's such a problem dealing with the VA that every county has to have a liaison officer to advocate for the veterans. No, there is no question that there's a real problem. And the bureaucracy has grown to such horrendous proportions, it's just completely out of hand. There was a huge step made last August when we passed the Choice Act, which allowed veterans, if they met certain criteria, to go see private physicians and have the VA reimburse them for it. In other words, get out of that VA bureaucratic monolithic system. And it is being implemented now. The VA has put a lot of very tough rules on it. The bureaucracy protects itself. And a lot of veterans are frustrated with that. But I think as that gets further implemented, there have been a couple of technical corrections done in Congress already. I think that will relieve some of the pressure. And I think the answer to it in the end is privatization, that we need to privatize as much of this health care as we possibly can. Now, all that being said, there are millions of good people that work for the VA, okay? Or hundreds of thousands of good people that are trying hard to see that these veterans get cared for. There's some bad ones too, but the overwhelming majority are good people trying to deliver the service they're hired to do. And I will tell you that I have, that most of the veterans are happy with the service they're getting provided. Councilman Paul Price, you know, he just
Horry County
retired from
Councilman
Horry
Paul
County.
Price.
Yeah, good friend of mine. He was a Marine for 7 years. He was in the Air Force for 14 years. And then he was in the South Carolina Highway Patrol for 20 years. He spent almost 45 years of his life protecting people. And then after serving in the military and the police, he thought he was tough enough for politics, so he ran for Horry County. But he asked me to go with him to the Charleston VA facility. He said, this was his words to me. He sent me an email. He said, I want you to see the finest medical facility I've ever been to. And so I went down there with him. He's had a couple of health issues since he retired, and we went through the facility, and he loved it. And I talked to a lot of veterans down there that truly thought they were getting great care. Others are a little frustrated. But there is no question that there is basically the VA has grown to such bureaucratic proportions that 80 people died in Phoenix, okay? And some people died here in South Carolina. The Charleston facility is very high ranked. The Columbia facility, not so much. And it's cost some people their lives. And the fact that we have to have so much of our congressional time and so much of our time with county employees dealing with the VA, it's almost like you have to have a bureaucracy to deal with the bureaucracy. Yeah, it's a problem.
I wanted, before we move on to some of the maybe domestic issues and international issues, I want to talk hyper-local about here in the district. Just first off, I-73. You know, we've been talking about it for years. You're into your second term now. Are we any closer?
Yeah, we are. It's certainly moving, not at the pace I'd hoped. When I got to Congress, it was stopped. There was no work on it at all. And we have worked very hard to push the permit as quickly as we could, and we got fairly quickly to mitigation. When I got to office and I met with the Army Corps right off the bat, they said we were 3 to 5 years away from a permit. That was 2 years ago. Once we get the mitigation out of the way, then we're 6 months from a permit. So the mitigation is the big issue. I think I've told you before, but they say we are destroying, quote unquote, 278 acres of wetlands from the North Carolina line to where 73 hits 22 at Aner. 278 acres. And for that, they want us to buy 6,800 acres to mitigate for that. So there's some back and forth about that with, you got DNR, Department of Natural Resources, you got Federal Highways, you've got the Army Corps of Engineers, you got South Carolina DOT, and everybody's letting their opinions be known and trying to get the best that they can for their particular angle on this, and hopefully that'll be resolved here pretty quickly, and then we can move quicker to a permit. And then we got a highway bill coming up and see if we can find some funding. You
think by the end of your second term you might have that permit?
I am very confident that we'll have the permit by the end of the second term, yes.
You want to talk about funding? You think you might?
Funding, do I think I'm going to have the $2 billion that it'll take to fund I-73 from the North Carolina line to 22 here real soon? No. Do I think I'm working hard on finding incremental steps? Absolutely, yes.
So we might be able to take it to maybe I-95, then another section.
I've already begun work on inserting language in the highway bill that would allow for tolling and would allow for public-private partnerships to speed the construction like they did with 22 and 31. And that requires a federal law to get that done. And the highway bill is the appropriate thing to do that. And so I'm going to make sure that language is in there. And then if we can find some funding in addition to that, I think we'll be, in a good position.
You have the Georgetown ports too. That was something you've really been working hard on since you started in Congress. How closer are we to getting the dredges actually going down there?
Well, before they can do that, they have to, the dredge material has to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And the dredge material with the industrial uses in the river before, they're real careful about where they put that. So they have spoilage basins, and those spoilage basins have to be prepared, And we got $2 million from the Army Corps of Engineers, and they'll be working on the spoilage basins this year. So that work is starting. We've got some state money, and we're hoping to get some more federal money for the dredging. But step number one, we got to get the spoilage basins prepared.
Now we're in a huge viewing area. We call it a viewing area in TV. You call it a district in Congress. Yeah. It's a huge viewing area, huge district. You, Darlington, Dillon, you know.
We've gotten help for the Dillon water system.
Florence.
We've gotten help for the Florence airport. We've gotten historic tax credits in downtown Florence. We've gotten help for the Timmonsville water district.
From all over, though, my question is, from all over, what are you hearing from the economic developers? What do they want? What do they say is going to bring jobs, not just to the tourism mecca here, but out there as well? What's something you think you're going to be focusing in on?
Infrastructure is the biggest thing we need. That road and that Georgetown port are the two biggest things. They have been since before I ran, and they continue to be. You know, we're in a pretty good spot in terms of we're a right-to-work state. Our taxes are reasonable. The southeastern United States is becoming more and more competitive. It's already competitive in the United States, and it'll become one of the highest competitive places in the world. Charleston Port is a huge factor. So we have a lot of things going for us. The biggest thing we can do is make the country more competitive. And that means things that you hear about all the time: tax reform, regulatory reform, you know, something approaching a balanced budget. All these things go into our national competitiveness, and those are things we're working on nationally. We've got local aspects of this, the infrastructure, we got national aspects.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit after we take a break. We'll be right back.
Thank you, my friend.
Welcome back to Carolina This Week. 7th District Representative Tom Rice is my guest this morning. We were talking about fixes for the district, what you're going to be working on, I-95, I-73, digging the Georgetown port out.
Right.
Let's talk about nationally. We're talking about what nationally needs to be done to get the economy going again. What's the biggest thing you think this Congress has done so far to get it going again?
Well, you know,
or keep it going.
The wheels of progress have started to creak into motion a little bit here. The last month, the first couple of months of this year were disappointing for me because the Republicans had the Senate and we weren't moving things quite as quickly as we were. We were rehashing some things. But in the last month, some positive steps have come forward. The Budget Committee, on which I sit, has put out our version of a budget, and it passed the House floor, went to the Senate passed its version, and we are in conference with the Senate right now, and the Congress will pass the first budget that's been done since probably 2006 this year. And then in reconciliation, we're going to work some on Obamacare, and we're going to send that to the president, and we'll see what happens. I don't like the fate of that part, but we got a budget. The second thing is we made the first step in entitlement reform with the doctor's reimbursement, what they call the doc fix for Medicare. That was a big step, you know, a little bit of entitlement reform. So there are about 5 big issues, I believe, that if we could resolve those or at least make some progress on some of them, I think our economy would explode. And those are tax reform. You know, everybody, from the president, Republicans, Democrats, everybody says we need to reform our tax system and make this country competitive. Social Security. You know, the White House, Office of Management and Budget, the Congressional Budget Office agree. Social Security, the trust fund will expire in around 2030. Medicare, same condition. The Highway Trust Fund, you know, the Highway Trust Fund is slated to run out of money this summer, and we keep putting these little patches on it, and nobody can rely on it, and the uncertainty that creates. So uncompetitive. So if you take those issues, okay, and immigration's another one, the 5 big issues. If you took those issues off the table, if we found some way to make some resolution, maybe we don't have to solve them all completely, but move the ball down the court and give our economy some certainty, give our business leaders some certainty. Can you imagine what that would do to this economy?
Well, a lot of the things that you want to fix, I agree, there is a lot of bipartisan support for. I think fixing the corporate income tax, bringing a lot of money back from overseas, is something I've heard Republicans and Democrats both talk about. Well, it seems like now you might be in a position to do that. But entitlement reform, Social Security in particular, it seems to me that'd be the toughest part of being an elected official, is seeing the need for some type of entitlement reform, but doing it in a way that's not going to make the people who put you in office mad at you.
Well, that's true. It's been somewhat of a pariah. And 10 years ago, nobody would have ever thought of raising solutions for it, but this is the truth. Nobody disputes that knows anything about it. Nobody disputes that it's got to be fixed. And the longer we wait to fix it, the worse off we're going to be. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the Bowles-Simpson proposals, which nobody likes, because everybody is affected in some way or another. And I'm going to make them into a bill because I recognize that we've got to fix it. And as hard as you want to try, you cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. It's a math game.
What should the retirement age be?
Oh, I think it needs to move up 2 years. My proposal would be move it up 2 years over 12 years and start that for people who are at least 8 years away from retirement. In other words, it won't affect anybody who's within 8 years of retirement. And the reason I say that date is because that's what the Budget Committee's been talking about with Medicare reform for the last 3 years. In the Republican budget, we passed Medicare reform. And what that does, the primary thing that does is, again, it doesn't affect anybody who's within 8 years of retirement or already retired. Standard Medicare continues to apply for them. But for people that are further than that away from retirement, they will allow private insurance companies to bid to provide Medicare coverage. And the federal government they'll allow 5 companies to bid. The federal government will reimburse not for the cheapest one, but for the second cheapest one. And so you can choose traditional Medicare or you can choose one of these other insurance companies.
Sounds like an insurance marketplace.
And it does have some similarities. And if you choose the highest price one, then you pay the difference. And if you choose the lowest price one, you get money back. And it's really what it's very similar to is Medicare Part D. And something like a third of people who are retiring now are electing Medicare Part D. I mean, it's not an unpopular program. It's not, this is not revolutionary, but this will save $1 trillion over 10 years.
Again, just back to it, the difficulty with which you have to approach entitlements, because you have baby boomers just flooding the retirement market, so to speak, and not quite as many people in my generation and before Generation X, and I don't know what they're calling the generation before me now, but they're not as many as the baby boomers. And I think a lot of young people, particularly maybe people 20, 30 years younger than me who are either just getting started or just getting into college, they're going to really have to foot the bill for a lot of people retiring in the next 20 years.
Well, what really bothers me is when people say, oh, it's fine, we don't need to deal with it, when they know full well that in 15 years, the Social Security Trust Fund will expire. And that doesn't mean that Social Security ends, but what it does mean is that the benefit will drop by a third. And you know, what will that do to our seniors? We have to make our promises to our seniors good. So we're going to have to find a solution. It's going to be a compromise solution, or it's not going to pass. And it's not going to be one that makes everybody happy. And like I said, I'm going to start with the Bowles-Simpson proposal, and I'm going to put a bill on the table. And if it goes anywhere, great. And if it doesn't, then I will make my best effort to make sure it does.
All right. I want to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk just a little bit about foreign policy and anything else you want to talk about. We'll be right back with Congressman Tom Rice. Welcome back to Carolina This Week. Congressman Tom Rice is my guest this morning. We've talked about a lot this morning so far. You mentioned immigration during the break. Well, let's jump on immigration. It doesn't seem like a whole lot has gotten done. A whole lot's been talked about.
That's right. You know, that's another one of those 5 big issues I was mentioning that we need to take off the table, and it doesn't seem like anything is moving forward. I'm going to put forth an immigration bill that is the primary thing it does, we have the most liberal legal immigration system in the world. We allow 1.1 to 1.2 million legal immigrants per year. 2/3 of those are based on family relationship. Because they're based on family relationship, we end up importing a lot of people with low skill set and low education. 40% of those people end up relying in some way on our social safety net, which makes us far less competitive. And more jobs go overseas because we're in more debt. So my proposal would be to do what most industrialized countries have done and to base most of their legal immigration quota on skill set. So if you have education or skill set that the country needs, then you can come. I'm not going to eliminate family relationship as a criteria, but I'm going to lower that percentage. Also, I would like to see universal E-Verify. I think that you're not going to keep people from coming into this country by building a wall on the Mexican border. You know, you can build a 100-foot wall the entire length, and people can get in a plane and fly over it, or they can get in a boat and go around it. With the carrot that brings them here, in fact,
Where there's a will.
something like 40% of our illegal immigration is overstayed visas. So the carrot that brings them here is the job, and E-Verify is the solution to that. South Carolina actually is one of about, I think, 10 states that actually has mandatory E-Verify now. It isn't enforced very well, but that's a law on the books in the state of South Carolina, and it should be nationwide.
When I was a younger reporter working in South Georgia, I used to do a lot of stories in the Vidalia onion fields and places like that. A lot of those farmers, and this was 15, 20 years ago, would say flat out, we can't do this without illegal immigrants. We can't operate.
Another part of my bill is to make sure there's adequate visas for positions that they can't fill, that American people just don't want to do. You know, certainly we have to have adequate agricultural labor and things like that. Yes,
because that's a huge.
absolutely.
Yeah, right here. Let's talk briefly about foreign policy. We had the attack recently, the Muhammad comic, and I don't want to say that was domestic terrorism, but that's the face of terrorism these days. These one or two people acting on their own. What do you think? Is Congress doing enough? Is the government doing enough to stop these cells? Is there too much government intrusion, you know, already as far as the NSC goes? What do you think?
I think there's too much government intrusion already. I've already backed a couple of bills that would require, you know, a warrant before the government gathers as much information as it has been gathering. But there's always going to be one or two disaffected people who do terrible things, and you know, we need to do everything that we can reasonably to stop that. And there's got to be a balance of, you know, you're protecting your individual liberty and making sure the country is secure. But I've always said, you know, what one madman is going to do, it's very difficult to stop everything like that now. You know, whether or not that was ISIS or ISIS related, I don't know. And certainly I support those people's right to express their frustration with their the people that put together that festival. But no, we need to do everything we can reasonably to make sure that terrorism is prevented. But it's always going to be hard when you got one or two people like that to catch every single thing.
And Iran, just real quickly, do you think there's going to be a deal this summer?
I don't know. It would be beyond my comprehension that we would ever do a deal with Iran that would allow them nuclear weapons if it's tomorrow or 13 years from now, as the president seems to think is okay. You know, the president, when he was campaigning, repeatedly said that a nuclear-armed Iran was not acceptable, and now he seems to have forgotten that. Why would we ever agree that a country that is saying death to the United States and death to Israel on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, should have nuclear weapons? It's completely nonsensical to me.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thanks for talking with me this morning.
What a pleasure.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back. That's all for Carolina this week. Hope to see you back here next Sunday morning at 11.